The studio carried that familiar energy that settles in just before a live conversation begins, when everything looks calm on the surface but hums quietly underneath. Warm lights softened the edges of the room, cameras rested in position, and the audience waited with relaxed expectations, ready for charm, humor, or an easy story they could lean into. It all felt routine, almost automatic, the kind of setting built to make people feel comfortable. But before the first question was even asked, something shifted. The guest sat still, hands resting loosely together, eyes lowered just a moment longer than expected. It wasn't staged or dramatic, it was human. In that small pause before the performance instinct could take over, the atmosphere changed. The room sensed it without anyone needing to say a word. There was weight present, something personal being carried into the space. Not heavy enough to disrupt, but real enough to be felt. The kind of quiet that asks for patience instead of applause. When silence becomes the message. When the host asked a simple question about love, the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but it was noticeable. It stretched just long enough to slow the room down, to pull everyone out of autopilot and into the moment. No one rushed to fill it. No one laughed nervously. The pause felt honest, as if the answer needed time to arrive. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than expected, careful but steady. There was no polish, no rehearsed phrasing, no attempt to turn the moment into something entertaining. He wasn't speaking as a public figure or an example. He was speaking as a person choosing truth over ease. In that moment, silence carried more meaning than any dramatic statement could have. It didn't push the audience away. It invited them closer. It reminded everyone that sometimes the most powerful part of a conversation is the space before the words. Honesty without performance. "We don't talk enough about how love can end, even when it was real," he said, simply. The sentence wasn't framed as advice or wisdom. It wasn't designed to go viral or spark reaction. It was offered as lived experience. There was no smile to soften it, no humor to make it more comfortable. Just a calm acknowledgement of something many people understand but rarely hear spoken aloud. His tone didn't ask for sympathy. It didn't search for validation. It carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent time sitting with the truth before sharing it. Across the room and beyond the cameras, people stopped multitasking, phones lowered, attention sharpened. The simplicity of his words created focus. This wasn't a confession or an announcement. It was reflection, and in that restraint, it felt deeply sincere. The weight of being seen as an example for years, the public had seen him as part of a reassuring story, one that people pointed to as proof that love could last, that partnership could endure time, pressure, and change. From the outside, it looked steady and uncomplicated. Shared moments, supportive gestures, smiles that suggested ease and understanding. It became something people referenced, sometimes without realizing it, as a symbol of stability. But love, as he gently explained, has layers that never make it onto screens. What people see is the surface, the moments that fit into a narrative. What they don't see are the quiet negotiations, the private doubts, the ways individuals grow and shift over time. Two people can love each other deeply and still change in different directions. Not because something went wrong, but because life keeps moving. Carrying the weight of being seen as an example made that truth harder to express, but it didn't make it less real. Love doesn't always end in failure. "I gave everything I had," he said after a brief pause, and so did the other person. There was no blame in his voice, no attempt to rewrite the past in his favor. Just acceptance. He spoke about love, not as something that ends because it's weak, but as something that sometimes changes because people change. That idea moved quietly through the room. It was comforting and unsettling at the same time. The thought that love can be genuine, deep, and meaningful, and still not last forever challenges the way many stories are told. Yet it's a truth many people live with. Hearing it spoken aloud without bitterness or regret gave it space to breathe. Love didn't fail, he suggested. It simply reached the end of the form it was meant to take. Remembering the beginning. As he spoke, memories surfaced, not only his own, but those of the audience as well. The first conversations that felt effortless. The early certainty that comes with connection. Long nights where time seemed to disappear, where being understood felt easy and natural. Love often begins with the belief that it's permanent, that the feeling itself is proof it will last. Standing at the beginning of a shared story, it's hard to imagine an ending, time, though, has its own rhythm. It introduces chapters no one plans for. Responsibilities shift, priorities change. Growth doesn't always happen at the same pace. None of this erases what came before. It reshapes it. Remembering the beginning doesn't make the ending more painful. It gives it context. The quiet guilt of letting go. He admitted that the hardest part wasn't the ending itself, but the guilt that followed. Letting go of something meaningful can feel like betrayal, even when it's necessary. Love rarely disappears all at once. It fades in small, subtle ways. A conversation that doesn't happen. A silence that lingers a little longer than before. Two people sharing space without truly connecting. These moments don't announce themselves, they arrive quietly, building over time. Recognizing them doesn't make someone ungrateful or careless, it makes them attentive. Accepting that truth, he explained, was one of the most difficult steps. Not because it meant something was wrong, but because it meant acknowledging that holding on wasn't always the most loving choice. What endings cannot take away. The hardest part, he said, eyes catching the studio light, is accepting that an ending doesn't erase what came before. The love wasn't wasted, it wasn't a mistake, it was lived fully and sincerely for the time it was meant to exist. That realization settled over the room without sound. Some people nodded, others looked down, lost in their own memories. Endings, he suggested, don't cancel meaning. They mark transitions, they leave behind growth, understanding, and the quiet knowledge that something real once existed. That truth doesn't demand celebration, but it does deserve respect. A room that felt understood. When the conversation ended, the response was immediate and unexpected. Messages began arriving, not filled with speculation or judgment, but with gratitude. People shared their own stories of love that ended gently, without drama, but with deep emotion. Some said they felt seen for the first time. Others said they finally had words for something they had carried quietly for years. What began as a personal reflection became a shared experience. The moment didn't offer solutions or closure. It offered recognition, and sometimes being understood is enough, beyond the headlines. Later, headlines tried to frame the moment as surprising or dramatic, but that wasn't what stayed with people. What lingered was sincerity. In a world built on polished narratives and perfect conclusions, he chose imperfection. He didn't attempt to control the story or soften it into something easier to digest. He spoke honestly and allowed it to exist as it was. That choice resonated far beyond the studio. It gave permission. Permission to grieve without shame. Permission to acknowledge love without rewriting it. Permission to accept that meaningful stories don't all end the same way. Carrying the truth forward. As he stepped into the next chapter of his life, one truth remained steady. Love ending doesn't mean love failed. It means it was brave enough to exist. Somewhere, people still believed in love, not because it lasts forever, but because even when it ends, it leaves something real behind. And sometimes, that quiet truth is more than enough.